Long before England had a Bible, before the Franks bent the knee to Christ, before most of Europe knew the name of Jesus, there was already a powerful Christian empire in Africa. An empire that carved skyscrapers from stone. An empire that minted gold coins stamped with the cross. An empire whose guardians claimed to protect the Ark of the Covenant itself. If that claim holds any truth, then the history of early Christianity has been told out of order. Tonight, we follow the inscriptions, the coins, the royal decrees carved into granite, the sealed chapel no outsider may enter. This is the story of the Kingdom of Aksum. 2,000 years ago, in the highlands of what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, a city rose above the plateau. Its name was Aksum. Granite towers, some nearly 100 feet tall, pierced the sky. These were not rough stones. They were engineered monuments, carved from single blocks, detailed with false doors and windows, imitating multi-story palaces. This was the capital of the Kingdom of Aksum, a state so influential that later historians would rank it among the great powers of its age. By the 1st century, Aksum controlled trade corridors linking Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. Ivory moved north. Gold moved outward. Frankincense passed through its ports. Roman merchants sailed the Red Sea following instructions recorded in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek maritime guide describing Aksum as a formidable inland kingdom. This was not isolation. This was connection. And then came a shipwreck. In the early 4th century, a Syrian Christian named Meropius traveled through the Red Sea with 2 young relatives. Their vessel was attacked near the African coast. The crew was killed. The boys survived. One of them was named Frumentius. Taken to the royal court in Aksum, Frumentius proved literate and capable. He gained the confidence of the king. When the ruler died, Frumentius remained as advisor to the young heir. That heir would become Izana. Izana's earliest inscriptions invoke traditional deities. They speak of victories granted by pre-Christian gods. But later inscriptions tell a different story. Archaeologists have uncovered royal texts written in Guiz, Greek, and Sabaean. In these later proclamations, Izana credits triumphs to the Lord of Heaven. The coins change as well. Earlier issues display solar and lunar symbols. Later ones bear the cross. This is among the earliest uses of the Christian cross on state coinage anywhere in the world. Frumentius traveled to Alexandria and was consecrated bishop by Athanasius. He returned to Aksum as its first bishop. By the mid-4th century, Aksum was officially Christian. This was happening at nearly the same time Constantine legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire. While much of Europe still followed older traditions, an African empire had aligned itself with Christ. But Aksum's claim reaches further back. Ethiopian tradition, preserved in the medieval text Kebra Nagast, tells of a queen who traveled from Aksum to Jerusalem, the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopian tradition as Makeda. She bore a son to King Solomon. That son, Menelik I, returned to Jerusalem as a young man. And according to the tradition, he brought back the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest described in the Hebrew Bible as holding the stone tablets of Moses. The Ark, Ethiopian guardians insist, rests today in Aksum, inside the chapel of Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Only one monk may see it. He is appointed for life. No outsider enters. Scholars debate the claim. There is no independent archaeological verification. Yet the belief endures. In the 6th century, Aksum projected power across the Red Sea. Under King Caleb of Aksum, Aksum launched a military campaign into what is now Yemen. The target was the kingdom of Himyar, whose ruler had persecuted Christians in the city of Nadran. Aksumite forces crossed the sea, defeated Himyar, and installed a Christian ally. This was an African Christian empire conducting international military operations decades before the rise of Islam. By this time, the Western Roman world had fractured. Europe was reorganizing into smaller kingdoms. Aksum, meanwhile, minted gold coins, built monumental architecture, maintained diplomatic relations with Byzantium. It was counted among the great powers of its era. And then, gradually, the global spotlight shifted. In the 7th century, trade patterns changed after the rise of Islam in Arabia. Red Sea commerce reoriented. Environmental pressures may have affected agricultural stability in the highlands. The political center of gravity moved southward. The towering stele remained. The inscriptions endured. The coins survived beneath the soil. But the empire faded from Mediterranean narratives. European histories of Christianity often trace a line from Jerusalem to Rome to Constantinople to Western Europe. Aksum rarely appears in that sequence. Yet the evidence stands in stone. Royal inscriptions bearing Christian declarations from the 4th century. Gold coins stamped with crosses. Archaeological remains confirming long-distance trade and state organization. Long before medieval cathedrals rose in France. Before Anglo-Saxon kingdoms embraced the gospel. Before the Christianization of Scandinavia. An African empire had already declared itself Christian. Its priests still chant in Guizi. Its churches still guard ancient traditions. Its capital still draws pilgrims. And within a sealed chapel in Aksum, a guardian monk keeps watch over a sacred object the world has never been allowed to examine. The Kingdom of Aksum forces a reconsideration. If one of the earliest Christian empires rose in Africa, if its rulers carved their faith into granite and stamped it onto gold, then early Christian history was never confined to Europe. It was global. And Aksum stood at its center. The story most people inherit about early Christianity begins in Jerusalem, moves to Rome, rises in Constantinople, and then spreads north and west into Europe. It is a line drawn across a Mediterranean map, a line that often skips the African interior. In that version of history, Rome stands at the center. The Roman Empire legalizes Christianity under Constantine. The Byzantine Empire refines doctrine. European kingdoms slowly convert over centuries. Africa appears, but usually as a footnote. Yet in the 4th century, while parts of Europe still followed older religious traditions, the Kingdom of Aksum had already aligned itself with Christianity at the highest political level. Its ruler, Izana, did not convert privately. He converted publicly. Officially. The evidence is physical. Inscriptions carved in stone. Before his conversion, they invoke traditional gods. Afterward, they proclaim victories granted by the Lord of Heaven. The coins change as well. Solar discs disappear. The cross appears. This was not symbolic ambiguity. This was state policy. By the mid-4th century, Aksum had declared itself Christian. At nearly the same moment Constantine was reshaping imperial Rome. But consider the timeline beyond the Mediterranean. England would not fully consolidate Christianity until centuries later, after waves of missionary campaigns among Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. France, emerging from the world of the Franks, would only gradually unify under Christian rule. Much of northern Europe would not abandon its pre-Christian traditions until the early medieval period. Yet in the highlands of what is now Ethiopia, Christianity had already become intertwined with royal authority. Aksum was not peripheral. It was contemporary. So why does it rarely anchor the narrative? Why do textbooks often describe Christianity as radiating outward from Europe, when one of the earliest state-level Christian conversions occurred in Africa? Was Aksum marginalized in later retellings? Or did shifting trade routes and political transformations simply push it out of the Mediterranean spotlight? There is no conspiracy carved into stone. There is no single document announcing exclusion. But historical memory has gravity. When European empires later dominated global scholarship, they centered their own pasts. Latin and Greek texts circulated widely. Guizi inscriptions remained less accessible to Western historians for centuries. And so the line from Jerusalem to Rome to Western Europe became the familiar path, even though another branch of the story had taken root further south. A Christian empire in Africa in the 4th century. An empire trading across the Red Sea. An empire whose bishops were connected to Alexandria. The conversion of Aksum was not symbolic isolation. Its first bishop, Frumentius, was consecrated by Athanasius in Alexandria. This linked Aksum directly to one of the most influential theological centers of the early church. This was integration into global Christianity, not separation from it. And yet, ask the average person to name the earliest Christian empires. Rome is remembered. Byzantium is remembered. Aksum often is not. If Aksum stood among the first Christian states on earth, why does almost no one talk about it? And there is another layer. one that extends beyond inscriptions and coins. Because Aksum does not merely claim early conversion. It claims guardianship. Within the compound of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in the city of Aksum, a chapel stands under constant watch. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark of the Covenant rests inside. No archaeologist has examined it. No independent study has confirmed it. One monk guards it for life. If the Ark were truly there, it would connect Aksum not only to early Christianity, but to the ancient narrative of Israel itself. Whether historical artifact or sacred tradition, the belief has shaped Ethiopian Christianity for centuries. It reinforces the idea that Aksum was not a late adopter of faith, but a guardian of something older. So the stakes are not merely academic. They are civilizational. If the Kingdom of Aksum was among the first Christian empires, if it shaped doctrine, politics, and identity in the 4th century, if it projected military power across the Red Sea under rulers like Caleb of Aksum, then the map of early Christian power was wider than commonly imagined. And if Aksum's legacy was later overshadowed by the rise of other empires, what else has been compressed into the margins of memory? If Aksum stood among the first Christian states on earth, why does almost no one talk about it? And what, exactly, were they protecting? To understand the scale of the story, we have to confront something that seems almost out of place in the ancient world. A Christian empire in sub-Saharan Africa in the early 4th century. Organized, literate, militarily capable, economically integrated. The Kingdom of Aksum was not a loose tribal confederation. At its height, its territory spanned much of what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. It controlled the port of Adulis along the Red Sea, a gateway that connected inland Africa to global commerce. From that port, ships sailed north toward Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean. They sailed east toward Arabia and the Persian Empire. They crossed the Arabian Sea toward India. Roman merchants documented these routes. Gold from Aksum circulated alongside Roman currency. Archaeologists have uncovered Roman coins within Aksumite territory, evidence of exchange, not isolation. This was a state embedded in the economic bloodstream of its era. And its capital, Aksum, makes that clear. The stelae still stand. Monolithic granite obelisks, carved from single pieces of stone, some rising nearly 100 feet into the air. They were engineered with mathematical precision. Balanced. Shaped. Decorated with carved windows and doors that imitate multi-story buildings. They marked elite tombs beneath the earth. These monuments required advanced planning, coordinated labor, and centralized authority. Aksum was wealthy enough to commission them, organized enough to raise them. And that is only the beginning. Coins discovered across the region bear royal names in Greek. Greek, the language of Mediterranean commerce. This was strategic. It allowed Aksumite currency to circulate beyond its borders. Earlier coins display crescent moons and solar discs, symbols tied to pre-Christian worship. Then, during the reign of Ezana, the iconography shifts. The cross appears. It is not subtle. It is stamped directly onto gold and silver coinage, a public declaration of religious identity. Royal inscriptions shift as well. Earlier texts invoke traditional deities such as Asta. Later inscriptions credit victories to the Lord of Heaven. Some are written in Guizi, some in Sabaean, some in Greek. This trilingual record signals international awareness. Aksum was speaking to multiple audiences at once. It was announcing its transformation to the world. But that's not the strangest part. The strangest part is the timing. The official conversion of Aksum occurred in the early 4th century. At nearly the same moment Christianity was emerging from persecution within the Roman Empire. While large sections of Europe still practiced pre-Christian traditions. While imperial politics in Rome were still negotiating the place of this new faith. Aksum had already aligned throne and altar. And it did so through a story that sounds improbable. Two shipwrecked boys. One of them, Frumentius, rose within the royal court. He gained influence as tutor to the young heir. He encouraged the establishment of Christian worship among foreign merchants residing in Aksum. When the heir ascended the throne as Ezana, the shift accelerated. Frumentius traveled to Alexandria, one of the intellectual centers of early Christianity, and was consecrated bishop by Athanasius. He returned not as a wandering preacher, but as an officially recognized ecclesiastical authority. That connection matters. Aksum was not inventing Christianity independently. It was linking itself to established theological networks. But the question remains: how did a kingdom south of the Sahara adopt Christianity so rapidly, at the highest level of power, before many European monarchies? Was it trade influence? Was it personal conviction by Izana? Was it political calculation, aligning with Rome's emerging religious direction? Or was Christianity already quietly present through merchants long before the king declared it official? Evidence suggests that Christian traders from Syria and Egypt had passed through Red Sea ports for decades. The faith may have been circulating informally before it reached the throne. Yet conversion at the royal level changes everything. It turns private belief into state identity. It transforms worship into policy. And in the case of Aksum, it reshaped an empire. By the mid-4th century, this African kingdom stood as one of the earliest officially Christian states in the world. Not centuries later. Not after European consolidation. But alongside Rome itself. A kingdom that many modern narratives barely mention, yet whose stones, coins, and inscriptions testify to a power that should never have been forgotten. So how did it happen? And why did this Christian empire rise in Africa, before so many of the monarchies that would later dominate the story? The turning point begins with violence at sea. A merchant vessel traveling the Red Sea. A sudden attack along the African coast. Passengers killed. 2 young brothers spared. Their names were Adesius and Frumentius. They were taken inland, escorted to the royal court of the Kingdom of Aksum. Foreign captives in a powerful African state. According to the 5th century historian Rufinus of Aquileia, the boys were educated and literate. Their abilities distinguished them. They entered royal service. And then something extraordinary happened. They rose. Adesius eventually returned to the Mediterranean world. Frumentius remained. When the Aksumite king died, the queen asked Frumentius to assist in governing until her son came of age. That son was Izana, a foreign captive, shaping the theology of a future king. Frumentius encouraged the small Christian merchant communities already present in Aksum. He facilitated worship. He strengthened connections with believers beyond Africa. But influence at court is one thing. Transforming a throne is another. Was this divine providence? Or political calculation? Izana's early inscriptions reveal a ruler loyal to traditional gods. He invokes deities such as Asta in military victories. The language is conventional for the time, royal power intertwined with ancestral worship. Then the language shifts. Inscriptions begin referencing the Lord of Heaven. Later texts more clearly identify the Christian God. The shift is visible in stone. And it is visible in metal. Aksumite coins from Izana's later reign bear the cross, among the earliest examples of a Christian symbol appearing on official state currency anywhere in the world. This was not private belief hidden behind palace walls. It was imperial declaration. But why? Consider the geopolitical landscape. To the north stood the Roman Empire, reshaped under Constantine, who had legalized Christianity in the early 4th century. To the northeast stood the Persian Empire, Rome's great rival. The Red Sea was a commercial artery. Trade legitimacy mattered. Diplomatic alignment mattered. Religious identity could reinforce political partnerships. Was Izana aligning Aksum with the emerging Christian establishment of Rome for economic advantage? For diplomatic recognition? For theological conviction? The answer may not be singular. Conversion at the royal level often carries layers, belief intertwined with strategy. Frumentius did something decisive. He traveled to Alexandria, one of the intellectual capitals of early Christianity, and appealed to its bishop for formal recognition. That bishop was Athanasius of Alexandria. Athanasius did not dismiss Aksum as distant or peripheral. He consecrated Frumentius as bishop and sent him back. That act meant something profound. Aksum was not an isolated experiment. It was integrated into the wider Christian world. Its bishop stood in apostolic succession, recognized by one of Christianity's most influential theological leaders. Recognition flowed across the Red Sea. Aksum was acknowledged. This was not a fringe conversion. It was institutional. And yet, a pattern emerges. While Aksum minted coins with crosses, while its king carved Christian declarations into stone, while its bishop was consecrated by Athanasius, Mediterranean sources mention Aksum sparingly. Roman records focus inward. Ecclesiastical histories center debates within imperial borders. Aksum appears, but rarely as a central actor. If Rome acknowledged Aksum's bishop, if Athanasius consecrated its spiritual authority, why does Rome rarely mention it? Why does this African kingdom, recognized in its own time, fade in later retellings of Christian expansion? The conversion was real. The inscriptions are real. The coins are real. The alliance with Alexandria is documented. So what happened to its place in memory? Was it distance? Language? Shifting power? Or did the rise of later empires redraw the narrative, centering those who would dominate the centuries that followed? The stones in Aksum still bear Izana's words. They do not fade. But memory can. And the deeper we look into Aksum's rise, the more pressing the question becomes. If this was one of the earliest Christian states on earth, officially converted, institutionally recognized, diplomatically connected, why does its story feel like a rediscovery rather than common knowledge? 1700 hours, 25:00. Empires can exaggerate their power. Chronicles can distort. Legends can grow over centuries. But stone and silver are harder to manipulate. The first layer of evidence lies in coins. Early Aksumite currency displays a disk and crescent, symbols associated with pre-Christian worship. These designs were not random decoration. They reflected royal ideology, divine favor, cosmic authority. Then, during the reign of Izana, the imagery shifts. The crescent disappears. The cross appears. Stamped onto gold. Stamped onto silver. Circulated across trade networks stretching from the African interior to the Mediterranean basin. These are among the earliest known state-issued coins bearing the Christian cross anywhere in the world. A coin is propaganda in metal. It travels farther than proclamations. It declares allegiance to strangers. When Aksum stamped the cross onto its currency, it was announcing identity not only to its subjects, but to foreign merchants, to Roman traders, to Arabian intermediaries. This was public. The second layer of evidence rises from the ground itself. Inscriptions. Carved into granite monuments in Aksum. Some written in Greek, the international language of commerce and diplomacy. Some written in Guizi, the classical language of the kingdom. Some in Sabaean, reflecting connections with southern Arabia. Before conversion, these inscriptions invoke traditional gods. Afterward, they speak of victories granted by the Lord of Heaven. Later texts reference Christ explicitly. The transformation is visible in syntax, in vocabulary, in invocation. A state rebranding itself, line by line. This was not quiet assimilation. It was carved into public monuments. The third layer is diplomatic. Frumentius, consecrated by Athanasius of Alexandria, connected Aksum directly to one of Christianity's theological epicenters. Alexandria was not peripheral. It was one of the most influential Christian cities of late antiquity. By recognizing Aksum's bishop, the wider Christian world affirmed that this African kingdom belonged within the same spiritual architecture as Rome and Constantinople. Trade flowed. Letters moved. Recognition was established. And for centuries, Aksum thrived as a Christian empire integrated into Red Sea commerce. And that's when everything changed. In the 7th century, a new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. Islam rose rapidly under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad and the caliphates that followed. Within decades, much of the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, formerly under Roman and Byzantine control, shifted politically and religiously. The Red Sea trade routes reoriented under new authorities. Ports once linked closely to Aksum found themselves within expanding Islamic polities. Commercial gravity shifted. Isolation increased. The Kingdom of Aksum gradually lost its dominant position in international trade. Political power moved southward within the Ethiopian highlands. And yet, something remarkable happened. Christianity survived there. Across North Africa, Once vibrant Christian communities in cities like Carthage and Alexandria gradually diminished under changing political and social realities. But in the Ethiopian highlands, Christianity endured. Not as a relic, not as a minor remnant, as a living tradition. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church continued its liturgy in Guez. Monasteries developed in remote highland terrain. Biblical manuscripts were copied and preserved. The faith did not disappear. It adapted. Geography played a role. The Ethiopian highlands are rugged, elevated, naturally defensible. Political continuity played a role. Successor states maintained Christian kingship traditions. Cultural integration played a role. Christianity had become woven into royal legitimacy, language, law, and identity. This was not a coastal faith dependent solely on Mediterranean trade. It had moved inland. But here is the mystery. Why did Aksum's Christianity endure for over a millennium, while many other early Christian regions transformed or declined? Why did the highlands of what is now Ethiopia remain predominantly Christian despite waves of geopolitical change around them? Was it geography alone? Was it political structure? Was it the depth of integration between crown and church? Or was there something else, a narrative so deeply embedded in identity that abandoning it would have meant abandoning the kingdom itself? The coins testify. The inscriptions endure. The diplomatic recognition is documented. Aksum was real. Its conversion was real. Its Christian identity was public and institutional. And when global power shifted in the 7th century, the empire diminished, but the faith remained. Why? 25:00, 35:00. The stones have spoken. The coins have testified. The inscriptions have confirmed an empire that officially embraced Christianity in the 4th century. But now the tone shifts. Because Aksum does not only claim early conversion. It claims custody. In the heart of Aksum stands the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Pilgrims gather there. Priests chant ancient liturgies in Guez. Within the compound, a small chapel stands apart. And according to Ethiopian tradition, inside that chapel rests the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest described in the Hebrew Bible. The vessel said to contain the stone tablets given to Moses. No tourist has seen it. No archaeologist has examined it. No camera has recorded it. One monk guards it. He is appointed for life. He never leaves the compound. When he dies, another is chosen. No one else is permitted inside. Pause. If the claim is false, why sustain it for centuries? Why bind a kingdom's spiritual identity to an object no outsider may verify? If the claim is true, how did it get there? The answer, according to Ethiopian tradition, reaches back nearly 1,000 years before Aksum's conversion to Christianity. It begins with a queen, the Queen of Sheba, described in the Hebrew Bible as visiting King Solomon in Jerusalem. In Ethiopian tradition, she is called Makeda. The story is preserved in the medieval text known as the Kebra Nagast, meaning the glory of kings. According to this narrative, Makeda traveled from her kingdom, identified with Aksum, to Jerusalem. She met Solomon. She returned home pregnant. Her son was named Menelik I. Years later, Menelik journeyed to Jerusalem to meet his father. And here the tradition makes its extraordinary claim. Menelik, accompanied by the sons of Israelite nobles, brought the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem back to Aksum. Some versions describe divine orchestration, that the Ark was meant to leave Israel. Other versions suggest it was taken without Solomon's immediate knowledge, replaced by a replica. However the story is told, the result is the same. The Ark arrives in Ethiopia. If true, this would connect Aksumite Christianity not merely to Rome or Alexandria, but to ancient Israel itself. It would mean that long before Izana carved Christian declarations into stone, a sacred object central to biblical history had already anchored Ethiopian identity. This is not a minor theological detail. It would position Aksum as guardian of one of the most significant relics in biblical tradition. And it would reshape how we understand the continuity between Judaism, early Christianity, and African kingship. But historians disagree. The Kebra Nagast was compiled in the 14th century, many centuries after the events it describes. There is no independent archaeological evidence confirming the Ark's presence in Aksum. The Hebrew Bible itself does not record the Ark's removal to Ethiopia. Scholars debate whether the narrative served to legitimize Solomonic dynasties that ruled Ethiopia in the medieval period, strengthening claims of divine ancestry. And yet, the tradition persists. It is not treated locally as metaphor. It is treated as reality. The chapel remains sealed. The guardian monk remains inside. For over a millennium, generations have believed that the Ark rests there. If the claim were invented for political legitimacy, it endured with extraordinary consistency. If it were entirely symbolic, it has been guarded with literal devotion. And this is where the investigation tightens. Because the Ark claim changes the stakes. It suggests that Aksum's Christian identity was layered upon an older sacred narrative, one that connected African kingship to Jerusalem long before European kingdoms traced their legitimacy to Rome. Was the Ark story a theological bridge, binding Old Testament tradition to Ethiopian monarchy? Or does it preserve a memory that has never been fully examined? The sealed chapel does not answer questions. It generates them. And whether historical artifact or sacred symbol, the Ark claim ensured that Aksum was never merely another converted kingdom. It became something more. A guardian. Of memory. Of lineage. Of a story that reaches back beyond Rome. And if that claim, even in part, holds weight, then Aksum was not only one of the earliest Christian empires. It was positioning itself as heir to something far older. The claim stands. The chapel remains sealed. The guardian monk keeps watch. But investigation demands friction. There is no independent, peer-reviewed archaeological verification that the Ark of the Covenant rests inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. No carbon dating. No photographic documentation. No open academic inspection. Scholars who have requested access have been denied. Historians who have studied the Ark tradition rely on texts, oral history, and ecclesiastical testimony, not physical examination. In an era where even minor relics are scanned, sampled, and scrutinized, this object remains beyond reach. Restricted. Guarded. Untested. And yet, within Ethiopia, the tradition does not waver. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church treats the Ark not as myth, but as living presence. Every Ethiopian Orthodox church contains a tablet, a sacred replica representing the Ark. These tablets are not decorative. They are central to worship. During major celebrations such as Timkat, they are carried in procession under embroidered coverings, accompanied by chanting and prayer. The Ark is not peripheral theology. It is liturgical architecture. The entire ecclesiastical structure mirrors the Ark's symbolism, sacred inner spaces reflecting the Holy of Holies described in the Hebrew Scriptures. This continuity is not recent. It stretches back centuries. So the tension sharpens. If the Ark claim is purely symbolic, why sustain absolute secrecy? Why deny examination that could at least clarify its age or origin? If the Ark claim is literal, why has no independent confirmation ever emerged? Why no leak, no verifiable documentation, no fragment analyzed under controlled conditions? Secrecy preserves sanctity, but it also preserves doubt. And doubt fuels investigation. Some scholars argue that the Ark tradition gained prominence during the medieval Solomonic dynasty, reinforcing claims that Ethiopian kings descended from Solomon through Menelik I. Political theology can be powerful. Lineage can legitimize rule. Others suggest that even if the original Ark is not present, an ancient Judaic or early Christian artifact could have inspired the tradition, later elevated into sacred narrative. Still others maintain that the tradition's endurance itself carries weight. Because myths usually evolve. They fragment. They contradict. But the Ethiopian Ark tradition remains strikingly consistent across centuries. The guardian monk is real. The restriction is real. The liturgical integration is real. The Ark, literal or symbolic, shapes identity in a way that transcends historical debate. And this returns us to Aksum's broader mystery. This was an empire that officially converted in the 4th century. That minted coins with the cross. That carved Christian declarations into stone. It survived geopolitical shifts that erased or transformed other early Christian regions. Its faith endured in the highlands. And at the center of that endurance stands a sacred claim sealed behind stone walls. Is the ark's power symbolic, anchoring national identity in ancient Israel? Or literal, preserved through centuries of guardianship? If symbolic, why the secrecy? If literal, why no independent confirmation? What would convince you? An archaeological examination? Radiocarbon dating? A public unveiling? Or is belief itself the point, sustained not by exposure, but by protection? The chapel remains closed. The guardian remains inside. And the question lingers. In the story of the Kingdom of Aksum, the stones speak clearly. The coins speak clearly. But behind one door in Aksum, silence speaks the loudest. Step back. Zoom out from the sealed chapel. From the guardian monk. From the granite stele rising over Aksum. Place Aksum beside the empires that dominate historical memory. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, centered in Constantinople, fills volumes of scholarship. Its councils shaped doctrine. Its emperors influenced theology. Its architecture still defines skylines. Medieval European kingdoms, from the Carolingians to later monarchies, anchor popular narratives of Christian expansion. Cathedrals, crusades, reformations, these stories saturate textbooks. But where, in most mainstream accounts, does the Kingdom of Aksum stand? It appears briefly, then recedes. Was it geography that pushed Aksum to the margins of later historiography? The Ethiopian highlands are elevated, rugged, separated from Mediterranean centers by distance and terrain. As trade networks shifted, communication narrowed. Or was it economics? In the 7th century, the rise of Islam transformed the Red Sea and Arabian trade corridors. Ports once tied closely to Aksum entered new political spheres. Maritime routes reorganized. Commercial centrality moved elsewhere. By the 7th and 8th centuries, Aksum's dominance declined. Archaeological layers suggest reduced monumental construction. Political authority shifted southward into the interior highlands. The capital itself gradually relocated. Power fragmented. The empire that once minted gold coins recognized across the Red Sea became less visible in Mediterranean records. Meanwhile, the Byzantine world continued producing written chronicles in Greek. Western Europe, centuries later, would generate vast Latin documentation. These texts were copied, preserved, translated, circulated through European universities. Guizi manuscripts remained largely within Ethiopian ecclesiastical contexts for centuries. Historical memory often follows preserved text. And so Aksum's voice, though carved in stone, did not circulate as widely in later European scholarship. Its influence narrowed geographically. Its trade networks diminished. Its political structure transformed. Yet something did not break. Christianity in what is now Ethiopia survived. Unbroken. While Christian communities in many parts of North Africa gradually diminished under changing political conditions. While theological centers once dominant in late antiquity faded from prominence. The Ethiopian highlands maintained a continuous Christian tradition from the 4th century onward. Liturgy continued in Guizi. Monastic communities expanded into remote landscapes. Manuscripts were copied by hand across generations. Dynasties rose and fell, but Christian kingship endured. That continuity is rare. Empires collapse. Religions fragment. Traditions dissipate. But in Ethiopia, the thread remains traceable, from Izana to later Solomonic rulers, from Frumentius to modern clergy. The political structure of Aksum may have declined. Its global prominence may have narrowed. But its spiritual architecture remained intact. So was Aksum sidelined because it disappeared? Or because its transformation happened outside the evolving centers of European power? History often amplifies the voices of those who dominate later centuries. Byzantium left vast written archives. Medieval Europe shaped the academic institutions that later wrote global history. Aksum left inscriptions, coins, monasteries, and a living tradition. Its empire diminished. Its trade networks shifted. But its Christianity endured, uninterrupted for more than 16 centuries. That continuity challenges the assumption that Christian history radiated outward primarily through Europe. It suggests another axis. Another center. Not erased, but overshadowed. And perhaps the deeper question is this. When we tell the story of early Christianity, are we following the loudest archives? Or the longest surviving traditions? If the Kingdom of Aksum was one of the earliest officially Christian empires, if its ruler Izana publicly declared allegiance to Christ in the 4th century, if its coins carried the cross across international trade routes, if its inscriptions in Greek and Guiz announced its faith beyond its borders, if its first bishop, Frumentius, was consecrated by Athanasius of Alexandria, one of the most influential theologians of late antiquity, then the structure of the story changes. Because that means Christianity did not expand outward from a single European core. It was already multi-centered. Jerusalem, Alexandria, Rome, Constantinople, and Aksum. Africa was not a late recipient of a European faith. It was an early architect of Christian statehood. At the very moment imperial Rome was redefining its religious identity, an African kingdom was doing the same. This forces a recalibration. The map of early Christianity stretches south across the Red Sea. It climbs into the Ethiopian highlands. It anchors itself in stone monuments and royal decrees. And it survives. Not as an archaeological curiosity. Not as a vanished civilization. But as a living tradition that continues to this day in Ethiopia. When medieval Europe was still forming its kingdoms, Ethiopian Christianity was already centuries old. When cathedrals were rising in France and England, monasteries in the highlands had long preserved biblical manuscripts in Guiz. This continuity is not marginal. It is foundational. It means the history of Christianity cannot be reduced to a Rome-centered progression. It was global from the beginning, connected through trade, through diplomacy, through theology, and Africa stood within that network as a power, not as an afterthought. Pause. But one question remains. If Aksum was this significant, if it converted early, connected internationally, endured through upheaval, and claimed guardianship of one of the most sacred objects in biblical tradition, why did its story slip so easily to the edges of global memory? The investigation brings us here, not to certainty, but to clarity. The archaeological record confirms that the Kingdom of Aksum was an early Christian state. Royal inscriptions carved into stone document the conversion under Izana. Coins stamped with the cross circulated through international trade networks. Greek, Guiz, and Sabaean texts place Aksum within the diplomatic and economic systems of late antiquity. This was not legend. This was governance. Diplomatic ties linked Aksum to Alexandria through Frumentius and his consecration by Athanasius of Alexandria. The empire was recognized. The theology was integrated. The state was organized. And then there is the Ark. The claim that the Ark of the Covenant rests within the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion remains unverified by independent examination. There is no external confirmation. There is no archaeological proof. But there is continuity. For centuries, Ethiopian Orthodox tradition has treated the Ark as living reality. Its symbolism structures worship. Its presence shapes sacred space. Whether literal artifact or sacred inheritance, the Ark claim is central to identity, not peripheral to belief. Perhaps the greater mystery is not whether Aksum held the Ark, but why a Christian empire that flourished before many European kingdoms was allowed to fade from global memory. Some truths are buried in sand. Others are sealed behind doors no one is permitted to open.